Video making may come naturally. It may even be a skill that gives them an advantage in an increasingly tough job market for everybody.
Free all of the time, you can call whenever, and I can get started with you whenever.
That's Dougal Shaw reporting, bringing an end to this edition of World Business Report. Thanks to Faria and Derek, our production team in London. Thanks to you for listening. Don't forget the BBC's Business Matters. I'll be back live on the World Service and Radio 4 here in the UK at midnight.
We are live.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Russ Lano. I'm the chair of the Community Path Project Committee. I know folks are still gathering, so we're going to hold on here for a few minutes, let a few more folks join, and then I will begin with an introduction to tonight's meeting. For those just joining, we're just waiting a few more minutes for another few folks to join, and then we'll get started. All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Community Path Project Committee. My name is Russ Lano. I'm the chair of the committee, and on behalf of my fellow committee members, Bonnie Friedman, Phil Lawrence, Holly Munson, Vince Stanton, Ellen Sugarman, and Kate Bowen, as well as our select board liaison, Roy Epstein, Town Administrator Patrice Garvin, and Director of Community Development, Glenn Clancy, as well as Jay Marcotte. I am really excited to have you all here for this meeting, and I will go ahead and officially call this meeting of the CPPC to order. Before we dive into the presentation, I'm going to go ahead and spend a few minutes providing a little context on and background on how we got to this meeting tonight, which is a public information meeting on phase 1 of the Belmont Community Path, and where we will be focused on the draft 25% design that our engineering consultant, Niche Engineering, has put together. So I think many of you on probably know, but for those who are less familiar with the project, Belmont has been discussing the idea of a community path through town for, almost 30 years. And it's that has proceeded in fits and starts, but I think it really picked up momentum back in 2012 with the appointment by the select board of a volunteer committee to really dive in and study potential path alignments. And that committee produced a report. The select board then appointed a subsequent committee, the Community Path Implementation Advisory Committee, to take the project to the next step. And that committee was charged with procuring an engineering consultant to conduct a feasibility study for the proposed Belmont Community Path. That feasibility study was completed in the fall of 2017. And, one of the primary goals of the feasibility study was to provide the town with sufficient information to make an informed decision about what the alignment of the community path should be, with the idea that once the town had decided on an alignment, the project could move into the design phase, which is where we are now. So, after the feasibility study was released, the select board really spearheaded essentially a year of pretty intensive study and consideration and deliberation and debate about where the path should be located. Ultimately, in the spring of 2019, the select board voted unanimously on a path alignment, and as you'll see tonight during the presentation, that path alignment is roughly this for phase 1 of the community path. Starting on the eastern end of Belmont, it proceeds from the existing Fitchburg cutoff path along the north side of the Fitchburg Railway, abutting Channing Road. It crosses into Belmont Center on the north side, still on the north side of the tracks, and proceeds to the existing Clark Street Bridge. So that's the alignment for phase one. Crucially, there is also a proposed underpass at Alexander Ave that would go through and connect to the existing bicycle through the high school property and connect to the existing bicycle lane on Concord Ave. So that's really the lay of the land we're talking about tonight. A couple other milestones to note in the project to date. That phase one of the Belmont Community Path has been officially submitted by the town and accepted by the Massachusetts Department of Transportation as a project that is eligible for what's called Transportation Improvement Program funding, TIP funding. And that occurred in 2018. The subsequent to that, the town meeting appropriated Community Preservation Act money to fund the retention of an engineering consultant to do the design work on the path. The select board appointed our committee, the Community Path Project Committee, to procure the engineering consultant for the design work and to work with the consultant as the path moved through the design phase. So the committee started working with Niche Engineering, which you will hear from tonight, last fall. And Niche has moved forward with the design work over the intervening months. You'll hear a little about the work they did leading up to this evening. But ultimately, they have produced a set of draft 25% design plans, which are, if you haven't reviewed them already, available on Niche's project website, which is belmontcommunitypath.com. You can go and take a look at those plans. I really encourage you to do so. Are available for download on that site. There is also important to note a place to provide written feedback or comments or questions or concerns on those plans. There's also a very brief survey posted along with those plans. So again, belmontcommunitypath.com. There's also a link on the CPPC's website to get to that site, but I'd encourage you to check that out. So I do want to say a little bit about what the 25% design phase is and what it isn't before we dive in with the consultant. So it's a really significant phase in the design process, in part because one of the things it does is show in a great deal of detail the actual location of the path. So, one of the things that Niche did over the fall and winter was do detailed survey work. And so, the plans show, I think for the first time since we town have been discussing this path, really exactly where everything is proposed to be. So I think that's a huge step forward and one of the reasons why this is a very important milestone in the project. Also, from an engineering perspective, of which I am not, it shows the structure of the features of the path in great detail. So things like retaining walls and exact dimensions of those things. And those appear, I think of it as sort of a blueprint for those things. And obviously, there's a lot of detailed engineering work that goes into producing those plans. And with those two things, what it allows us to do is understand with quite a bit more specificity the estimated cost of constructing the path. And that's one of the reasons why this is a key milestone, because once we complete and submit the 25% design to the state, it allows us to be, what they call programmed for TIP money. These are federal highway dollars that are allocated by the state to eligible projects. And obviously, in order to do that, they need to have a pretty firm estimate of what the project will cost to complete. So at the 25% design phase, we will have an opportunity to potentially be programmed for funding. So that is the goal we are working towards. The TIP funding process is a yearly thing with essentially a 5-year time horizon. The process starts in the fall and concludes in the late spring. So we will be submitting, hopefully, the 25% design plans to the state. Hopefully this fall. And there's a process by which those need to be reviewed and approved by the state. And the state will hold its own public hearing related to the 25% plan. So all that will hopefully happen in the fall and winter time frame, but hopefully will allow us to potentially be programmed for construction funding on that 5-year time horizon for the community path. So this is why this is a very significant milestone for the project. But there are a couple things that the 25% design isn't. It's not a final decision on really what the path is going to look like. So what we don't know, what is still to be decided during the design process, is things like the particular landscaping treatments, the kinds of trees and other aspects of the landscaping that will define what this looks like visually. The sort of treatments on the faces of walls, for instance. None of that stuff has been decided yet, and that will be something that we in the CPBC and the consultant will be gathering additional public input on as the design phase progresses from 25% to 75% over the coming year. So that's where we are tonight. Again, I'm really excited because I think this is I think what you'll see tonight will answer some of the questions that have always been swirling about this project, and in a much greater level of granularity than we have been able to do so in the past. And I will also note that these are draft plans, meaning these are not finalized, and your input tonight is important to actually being able to finalize them. I know Niche is very receptive to hearing your thoughts, your comments, your concerns. I know that some of the stakeholder engagement work, including, for instance, a site walk they did along the Channing Road corridor last fall have already been influential in defining what some of this design looks like. So again, I really encourage you to study these things closely and provide feedback. As always, I would encourage you to keep your comments succinct and on point and on topic. I urge you to minimize your any duplicative comments you've had, and as always, just keep in mind that we are neighbors here, and that this is a community path, and I hope you'll be civil and really just remember that this is a project that, at least in my view, is going to be a great asset for all of us. So with that, I'm gonna turn it over to our engineering consultant. John Michalak is our project manager over at Niche. He's going to go through a presentation with some of his colleagues. At the conclusion of that presentation, there will be an opportunity to provide those comments and feedback. I'd ask you to do that by using the raise hand feature here. Our town administrator, Patrice Garvin, will be moderating, essentially calling on folks to provide their comments once the presentation has concluded. So please look to her for that. And with that, I will turn it over to John. Thank you again very much for being here.
Great. Thank you, Russ. I'm John Michalak, Senior Project Manager with Niche Engineering. With me this evening presenting is Isabel Kobish, a Senior Planner with Niche, as well as Sean Sanger and Aaron Creamer from Copley Wolf, our landscape architects on our team. I just want to mention that this presentation will be posted tomorrow on our website. As Russ mentioned, that's belmontcommunitypath.com. There'll be a slide at the end that'll show the website address and some of the information that you can find on that website. Tonight's presentation doesn't include the actual plans that Russ mentioned that you can download from our site. We've taken portions of those plans and colored them up so that they're more easily viewed on the screen while we present, as well as some additional landscaping, renderings, and colored up sketches to give you an idea of and a flavor of what the proposed landscaping could look like at this point in the project. As Russ mentioned, these are just draft plans. This is a progress. We're working towards our 25% design. We feel it's very important to get feedback from the community. As Russ mentioned, we've already heard some comments, and that's influenced some of the elements that we've incorporated into the design, and we'll talk about those. Once we've gone through the design, we will go through the next steps for the project, and then provide opportunities for you to provide feedback, which can be either through this meeting this evening, as well as through our website, which will continue to accept those comments from the public through our website till the end of the month. So as Russ mentioned, he talked about the beginning of the project over at Brighton Street near the Fitchburg Cutoff. For engineering plans, the plans usually go west to east, so from left to right. So this evening, we're going to talk about the Clark Street pedestrian bridge as the beginning of the project, which, as Russ mentioned, phase 1 extends from Clark Street to the Brighton Street crossing and ties into the Fitchburg Cutoff path. Access points will be provided from Pleasant Street at the Clark Street pedestrian bridge, connection from Concord Ave and Belmont Center near Belmont Center Station, connection from Channing Road along Alexander Ave, where there's a proposed underpass that goes underneath the railroad tracks and then continues to Concord Ave, as well as the connection at the crossing at Brighton Street. So a feasibility study was conducted for the Belmont Community Path, and it was submitted to the town and the Community Path Advisory Committee in November of 2017. As Russ mentioned, the project was accepted by MassDOT to be TIP eligible in July of 2018. And what that means is that the state has agreed that this project is approved to utilize TIP funding, which consists of state and federal funding. And the town's obligation for that is to pay for the design of the project, as well as the design has to meet state and federal standards. So MassDOT will be reviewing each of the design submissions to make sure that the design meets their current standards. At the beginning of the process, we developed what we called a conceptual design report. And what we did was we looked at some ideas as to where the path, alignment, and connection could be made. Sometimes we had several options at different segments along the path. We put this together, submitted it to the town, MassDOT, and the MBTA on February 6th of 2020. And the intent of this was to get initial feedback from MassDOT and MBTA on some of the design ideas and find out what they would approve and what they wouldn't approve. So once they reviewed that concept design report, we met with the MBTA and MassDOT on March 9th of 2020 and had a very informative conversation and got a lot of good feedback from the MBTA. And I'll go through that as we go through the proposed design alignment as part of the presentation. We also prepared boring plans, which are part of the geotechnical analysis being done by GZA. And the boring plans are required for the underpass and for retaining walls. And they'll take that boring information and develop a geotechnical report that also has to go to MassDOT at the 25% design level. The boring plans were prepared and submitted to the MBTA since some of the borings will occur on MBTA property. So far to date, the borings for the underpass that were conducted on town-owned property have been completed, and the borings for retaining walls on MBTA property, we're waiting for the MBTA access permit. I know GZA has applied for that and had some feedback, so we expect to get that soon, which will allow them to complete the rest of the borings, complete the geotechnical report, so that we can submit the 25% design submission to MassDOT. And we're anticipating that happening towards the end of the summer or in the fall of this year, once all of that, the geotechnical analysis can be complete. So here's the design schedule. The concept design report was submitted February 6, 2020. Tonight, we're holding the public information meeting and gathering input from the community. And once we've received that input, completed the geotechnical program and the report, we'll be submitting the 25% design to MassDOT. Then MassDOT will review the design submission and all the documents we submit to them. Their review typically takes about 90 days to review a submission. Once MassDOT has reviewed the plans and confirmed that the design has been done in accordance with state standards, MassDOT will host a design public hearing. And that public hearing will be run by MassDOT. We'll give a presentation on the 25% plans that were ultimately approved by MassDOT to move forward to final design. They'll also explain the MassDOT process as well as the right-of-way process that MassDOT will require for any temporary permanent easements that may be required for the project. And then tentatively, once we get through the design public hearing, we'll finalize what's called a 75% design submission. That will go to MassDOT. MassDOT will review those plans. Those will be a little bit more detailed than the 25% plans. And then we'll incorporate their comments and then submit what's known as the 100% design plan. So we anticipate that happening in the fall of 2021. So once the 100% design plans are approved, the project will be ready to advertise for construction. We're in control of our design, and we think we can have the design done by the end of 2021. Unfortunately, as Russ mentioned, the project has been programmed for the TIP, but they haven't set a date yet to advertise the job or construct the project. The projects that are listed on the TIP, it goes out for 4 or 5 years. So once we're done with the project, they'll have to program that on a particular tip year. And there's an opportunity to move that up. So that's why we want to accelerate the design, get the design process complete in the next 2 years. And then hopefully MassDOT will program this for a particular construction year, and then we'll know when it will be built. When we get started in the fall, we conducted a series of initial meetings with various town departments and commissions, coordinated with the Belmont and Middle and High School Building Committee, the school committee, public safety, fire department, public works. And this was all in an attempt to gain as much information initially as possible so that we could begin to start developing 25% design plans. And now I'll turn it over to Isabel.
Good evening. My name is Isabel Kaubisch with Snitch Engineering. I'm an urban planner and project manager, and I hope you can hear me well. So I wanted to give you an update on our public engagement and outreach project process on the project since we started last fall. As already mentioned, today is all about the 25% design progress report, and we want to show you how what we hear from stakeholders, such as you, has influenced the design to date and how it will influence our design moving forward. And the purpose of the public engagement is to inform and to gather feedback from stakeholders such as you, and that will inform the designs, and then also as a nice side effect to build excitement for the project. What you already saw is our website for the project, and this is a snippet on that available under www.belmontcommunitypath.com. And it has a sign-up function shown here on the right side. And when you sign up through this function, you'll receive blog updates and get information updates on what's new, what's happening on the project. In addition to that, we are having obviously public meetings such as today. There's another one in the fall and another one then at the 75% design stage. We encourage you to comment on the designs and to provide feedback via survey. And Russ and John already talked about this a little bit, and I will show that just in a second. In addition to that, we also conducted outreach with stakeholders such as the butters. And if we go on to the next slide, we see opportunities to engage today and in the future moving forward. So this is the website I mentioned, and on the homepage there are like 2 black buttons, and these bring you right to the 25% designs. You can view them, you can download them, and you can provide comments right on this website. And then there's also the opportunity to participate in a very short, less than 5-minute survey. And the survey is geared at just gaining a little bit more information how people would be using the path. And I will share a little bit more information about this some more. Then foremost, what this meeting is about is we not just want to share the information and how we derived at a 25% design progress to date, but also we want to hear your feedback. And this is what's happening in the second part of today's meeting. Like after we're done with the presentation, we'll kind of like hand it over to Patrice and you to ask questions. And that has already been described by Russ. So you would raise your hand. There's a chat function and there's a raise hand function. If you look at your screen at the bottom, there are a couple of fields. So you would use those functions to participate if you want to comment. The survey and the 25% design progress reports, comments, this function is available until the end of the month. And we encourage you to participate in that. Another opportunity to engage kind of builds on some outreach and some engagement that was already had with a student community, with a student group. And so we had a meeting with the Belmont Middle and High School in January, together with Kate Belmont and Isaac Taylor. And as part of that student focus group meeting, students shared their thoughts on the path. And so I'll share some of the results of that in just a second. But so this might be one idea to potentially continue discussions in that format. And then there's also the opportunity to get creative in the call for art. And if you go on the next slide, we have the opportunity for interested students or kids to submit some kind of creative artwork to get thinking about like what they might envision for a logo or a tagline, or there are no limits. So whatever you think might be a creative way that connects you with the community path. So we encourage you to submit your ideas, and this information is also posted on the website. So if you're interested in that, you can check that out. And on the next slide, I want to share what we heard from stakeholders. And as previously mentioned, we conducted one of a few abutter sidewalks in November. It was like the first real chilly November days. We kept us warm by walking along Channing Road. And the purpose of that meeting was to learn about the concerns and discuss opportunities with abutters, like how they would see the community path becoming their new neighbor. And we engaged with abutters. We discussed potential design opportunities, such as particular materials or screening materials, drainage solutions, potential connections to the path, and specific destinations in town. Several abutters also kindly invited us to come into their backyards and take a look at the path from their backyard, so to say, which allowed us to take photos and then incorporate that into our design graphics. And you will see that as we move forward. So this was very important for us to see how specific viewpoints would be taken, like from the past and from various angles. So we'll get to see that in a bit. And on the next slide, you can see like what we hear from abutters. And not surprisingly, abutters were concerned with privacy. There was also a concern about potential noise from people like using the bike or community path. And we discussed some potential solutions about that could engage the opportunity of vegetation or screening. And we will do our utmost to preserve current trees. And all these aspects will be discussed more closely as we continue through the design. So we're at a stage where it's crucial, and it's important that these concerns are brought to the table. And so we will show you how we already took some of the information and incorporated into designs, but this is not the end. So this is moving forward as the designs move forward. Drainage issues were also brought up due to the clay soils at the site, and we actually incorporate that into our 25% designs already. Then one big opportunity, as most people see it, is the Alexander Avenue Underpass, because it will enable school kids to use the underpass safely to get to school, and not having to cross the railroad tracks, which is, as far as I hear, still one of the ways of kids getting to school, if their parents like it or not. So that while it offers very good benefits for for students and for residents overall to get onto the path and to kind of like go the larger way around it. There was also the concern from abutters that people would use that to park there and then use the path, and it would be kind of like a congregated area. So again, we're thankful for these issues having been brought up, and these will be addressed moving forward through some kind of signage or whatever, what will be decided and developed. Another topic, so what I mentioned was that we had like a meeting with a student focus group in January, and which was like very well received. I was amazed by the in-depth and the thoughtfulness of students presenting their thoughts, and they immediately thought about, well, they loved the idea of being able to ride their bike to school or walk to school. They also brought up the topic as to what does it mean? like if I'm not that skillful, or if there is like some person that is really fast. And so these thoughts went more about like, how can this path become more of a community path that serves everybody, and how can different levels of ridership be accommodated, different uses of the path, and so on. And one solution moving forward will obviously go about awareness and education, and maybe signage and some guidelines and rules. Another opportunity that was also brought up by the students was some opportunity to potentially go about art, and whether that might be installed like on the school property or at the entrance to the Alexander Avenue underpass. That might be seen. And so these discussions were very early on, but yeah, I think it's a very exciting opportunity for the school to potentially become involved in that. If we go on the next slide, we can see some very early feedbacks on the 25% progress designs, and these are the comments that we received so far on the 25% designs. And the comment function was opened on July 2nd, and as I said, it will be open until the end of the month. So we encourage you to provide your feedback on this, and to give us your comments in writing. And some of the topics, just to name a few here, were dealt with privacy and screening, lightning on the path, pros and cons of being able to see better, and then on the other hand, if others not wanting to have like lighting shine right into the backyard. Concern about safety, safe use of the path overall, about interconnections on the path, potential safety issues and crashes due to some turnage areas, and so on and so forth. And we will go about those sections or some of those aspects that were brought up here when we talk about design in more detail. And if we go on to the next slide, we see some of the comments that we so far received on the survey. As I mentioned, it's a very brief survey. It's just 7 questions or 8 questions. And so far, 170 respondents replied to the survey. And the purpose of the survey overall is to for us to gain some confirmation as to what people would like to use the path for, what means they would be using, if they have like any additional certain needs that might need to be accomplished. Like we will be, for example, looking at if there is like an increased need for biking stalls or bike racks, like at a particular location. So one of our questions as to where would you access and where you're entering the path, or vice versa, where you're entering and where you're accessing the path. And yeah, so this information will be very helpful for us moving forward and to hear from you. And so just as a gist, so what answers we received is no surprising, people will be mostly biking or walking along the path. People will love it for recreational purposes. There's a wide usage of path users from what we've seen from the survey so far. So like from the toddler stroller to elderly people, so everybody is kind of like anticipating to use a path. So, which is great to hear. And people also are very positive about the opportunity of using the Belmont Community Pass to get more safely throughout town, to not being stuck in traffic, and to being able to use the Community Pass to get to the school, the post office, and then also vice versa to Alewife Station, or commuting further to the Minuteman Bike Path or to Waltham and so on. So overall, the responses we received were very positive, and people are very excited about this opportunity to use the path. And on the next slide, you see this is called a word cloud. And one more thing on the survey is also we kind of drafted the survey really briefly, and it's geared more towards like usage and how that would in the end influence the design. So we looked at pre-existing information, we looked at the feasibility study, we looked at available data overall. So that is not something that we're asking now, as like we're not repeating the wheel. So it's more geared towards gaining new information. And so this question here geared towards like gaining a more input on how people would want to share the path, so the multi-usage of the path. And the responses we see here, and the way a word cloud functions is the larger the words are, the more people actually use those, so they pop up more. And it's great to see that people is at the front and center of the community path, so this is how it should be. And people are interested in an accessible path, in signage, and connecting to the Minuteman Bikeman, to Alewife. A wide path has been requested at some point, a safe path and easy access, and so on and so forth. In addition to other amenities such as benches or recreational opportunities. And on the next slide, this kind of like concludes the engagement portion here. So this question geared towards what additional comments do you have, and what other comments could you provide us with, like what do you want us to know? And so again, we encourage you to submit your responses and let us know your concerns and what you like about the path and what you would want us to consider more. And yeah, so moving forward with the engagement, as mentioned, so there will be additional opportunity for feedback, like in the second portion. And then once COVID kind of like clears up, we're open and we're happy to meet with abutters and like have additional sidewalks or wherever we want to meet and discuss. So we're really interested to hear from you and to continue the conversation on what you're thinking of. With that, I'm handing it back to John.
Thank you, Isabel. So we've taken the information that we've got, the feedback from the town, MassDOT, the MBTA, as well as the feedback from the community received to date, and developed what we think is the best width and path location for presenting this evening. And one of the items that Isabel talked about was that in our survey, we found that biking was the most popular means of transportation, but there was a considerable amount of people that would walk, run, or jog on the trail. So even though the feasibility study talked about a 16-foot wide trail, what we're proposing is 12 feet of it to be paved and then a 4-foot, possibly a soft shoulder for walkers and joggers and runners to use away from the bicycling traffic. One of the suggestions we're making is to maybe put that on the north side of the trail, on the far side from the MBTA tracks. One of the items that was brought up from the MBTA was that they're going to require a 10-foot minimum setback for any obstructions from that outside track along the railroad. And that's for them, their maintenance requirements for the track. So they require 10 feet. So there are areas where we do get close to that 10-foot minimum setback. But for the most part, we've situated the path further away. Typically, it's about 22 feet away from those tracks. One of the other items to point out is that the initial thought was that the path would fall along the property owned by the Belmont Citizens Forum. And what we found is that that's the area that has the most existing vegetation, and it's usually on a slope. So in taking into consideration the concerns of the abutters, privacy, loss of vegetation, again, we're looking at pushing that path closer to the railroad tracks than it was initially thought, which is further away from the backyards of the abutters. Another item that was brought up, as Isabel mentioned on our site walk, was that there's existing drainage issues in some of the areas because of a clay layer that doesn't let the properties drain as well. So they're concerned about any runoff from the construction or the new trail. So we're proposing to capture any stormwater runoff in a grass swale to prevent it from flowing further into abutting properties. As well as installing an 8-inch subdrain that'll actually capture that runoff as it flows along the swale and percolates into the ground, capture that runoff, and then send it into various locations in town. So that's another element that we've built into the project based on some of the comments and concerns that we'd heard from abutters. We're also proposing to separate the path from the tracks, usually with a chain link fence of varying height, depending on how close we get to the tracks, as well as in areas where it's needed, we could have a timber railing or some other type of screening or barrier. But for the most part, we're going to have a chain link fence separating the trail from the tracks, the active tracks, which will also have gates situated along it, as was requested by the MBTA and the fire department, so that they could access the tracks if need be for an emergency. So the beginning of the path is at the Clark Street pedestrian bridge, which is located to the south of the railroad tracks. And we're creating a trailhead here. This is the beginning of phase 1 until phase 2 gets constructed. That ties into the existing sidewalk on Pleasant Street and can utilize this paved area here to create a more inviting trailhead and allow people to access it either from Pleasant Street or from Clark Street. This path will then travel down grade to meet the path which will follow along the north side of the railroad tracks, as I mentioned, closer to the tracks. But this will be held up by a retaining wall as the path travels down, and it'll be a gradual slope going down, and it will meet ADA, American with Disabilities Act's requirements, so that And that's also in accordance with state standards. In order to be allowed for funding, we need to meet ADA requirements. So this path will be less than 4% or less than 5%. Typically, we're holding 4.5% to make sure that we're not going to approach or exceed that 5% requirement. The green represents some of the grading that would be necessary in order to construct the path. And you can also see the dashed swale here that's shown that captures the stormwater and conveys that further to the east. And this would be a cross-sectional view of that with Pleasant Street up above, the slope and reestablishment of that slope with loam and seed, the proposed grass swale, and the subdrain, and then the path as it climbs upgrade, being supported by a retaining wall that varies in height from 0 as it ends to 25 feet tall. And any surface treatment for the wall, whether it's vegetated or a decorative pattern, hasn't been decided at this point. So again, that's something that still needs to be decided, and community input would be accepted on that. There'd be a proposed chain link fence on top of the wall, which is required so that people would not fall or jump off of the wall. It's set back from the tracks in order to minimize the amount of disturbance. And then this area down below also provides an opportunity to construct the path and the wall from down below without interfering with the MBTA tracks. And I'll invite Aaron or Sean to talk about the landscaping in this area.
Yeah, so this is a section that's a little bit further down from where John was just showing you with the taller wall. So this is back a little closer to where we run in, or we have residences up next to it. So what you're starting to see is obviously the tracks. They're on the far right of the section on the lower side of the sheet. We're basically showing the new fence and the retaining wall along that edge. And then what you're really also then starting to see is just really the relationship of the path, if you will, relative to the abutter homes there on the far left. And just for a point of reference, we'll kind of have several of these over the course of the presentation here this evening. But in the plan view up above, essentially that section is cut right through kind of the center of that particular home and then running out through the tracks. So what you can see is where we can or where there are existing trees, we're really trying to save those as much as possible. You're seeing a new evergreen kind of a label like right in there, and that's certainly a piece of the puzzle we want to be able to have further conversations with down the road regarding the essentially kind of the level and the comfort of screening. We certainly heard during our walk back in November that certainly a lot of people had pretty expressed concerns, I guess let me rephrase it that way, about using a lot of evergreens. They were very concerned with losing a lot of their daylight that would be coming in from the south in through the trees when the ones that are there that are primarily deciduous actually drop their leaves. So they'll get a lot more light into their backyards and into their homes with the sun being at a low angle into wintertime. So that was a big concern, and we certainly heard that and listened. There may be other instances where the path is much lower and an evergreen might give a little more privacy. That's certainly something we'll work through as we further the plans and make sure that we're not doing anything that would be considered certainly detrimental to the abutters along the path.
Okay, thanks, Sean. The next segment of the path that we wanted to talk about was the connection at Belmont Center. Specifically, we're looking at a crossing an access point on Concord Avenue. What we're proposing right now is a gradual, accessible connecting path that'll gradually come up and then meet up with the path. This is actually going to be opposite of the existing station platform, which isn't part of this project, but we will be able to access that platform both from this gradual accessible path, as well as a new paved segment connecting the existing stairwell from the sidewalk on Concord Ave up to meet the platform as it crosses the path. And this area we've shown in green has a lot of potential for amenities and improvements that will be shown more as we develop the final design. We've also shown that there's the existing crosswalk across Concord Ave today, where people cross to get to the stairwell to access the station. And then we're proposing a new crosswalk at the location of our new accessible path, which could also be used by bicyclists. So it'll be wide enough for bikes. And we're proposing a new crosswalk, and this would affect several parking spaces here, possibly 4 spaces, in order to build these curb extensions to provide a nice visual cue and make for a safer pedestrian and bicycle crossing at this location. And then this is a cross-sectional view which shows the main path, 12-foot wide, a grass separation. This would be that connecting accessible path, currently shown a little bit higher on top of the existing retaining wall, protected by a metal railing. You've got Concord Ave and the existing sidewalk down below that it would be meeting up with. This area is shown a little bit before the connection to the platform, so we've shown it separated with possibly a wood railing fence and then a grassed area between the existing platform and this path section.
Yeah, so as you can see in the plan, I think there's a real opportunity here to be able to really enhance the green space. This is certainly one of the most visible areas from the roadway and from downtown, to be honest, and the merchants and the government center across the street and the kind of the common, the town square, if you will. So I think there's really some great opportunities to make this feel as though it's an extension of the greater center of Belmont. So we're going to continue to really work with the design team on that, as a lot of the kind of what I'm going to call a little more complicated topography and grade changes and accessibility issues are resolved. We're certainly going to be at the table to be able to kind of influence those designs, but I think you'll see a lot more as the plans move forward and are further developed, and really trying to maximize and really enhance the green space and the quality of these spaces to be able to tie the commuter rail station as well as the path into downtown Belmont. So what you're really seeing once again is the plan in the upper left, and then a section to go with that as well across the bottom. But you do start to get a better idea of kind of the heights and the elevations. Obviously, the trails, or excuse me, the tracks being much higher on the far right. And the commuter rail station, which we realize is not currently able to really serve from a wheelchair access point yet. But I think what we're going to be able to propose here, as John mentioned, in accommodating the accessibility within the path network, I think it's just going to give us a much broader access to the path as well as the platform. And I think you can start to think about this being much greater than certainly individuals within mobility challenges, but it will also make, whether it's a bike path, bikes, or whether we're kind of talking about people with luggage or people with strollers, all of those kind of components will be a much easier access to the path as well as the platform.
And then as the path continues east, it'll cross over the Concord Ave Bridge north of the existing railroad tracks. There's plenty of room there. And then as we cross behind number 7 Channing Road, right now the property in number 7 Channing Road extends pretty close to the tracks. And as I mentioned, we've got a 10-foot minimum clearance requirement from that outer track. So placing the path and that fence between this extension of the building at 7 Channing Road, while staying 7 feet away from the railroad tracks, we're showing that this alignment, as shown, would actually require an easement from that property owner. So that's something that we would need to work out as we're developing the design further. But in this case, it's actually and here are the cross sections of that view. We've got the path as it travels over the bridge on the north side of the existing railroad tracks. As I mentioned, we're much further away than the 10-foot minimum here. We can put new fences and railings to protect trail users from the edge of the bridge. Again, this bridge is actually a historic structure, and we did meet with the Historical Commission informally, and we'll be meeting with them again when we discuss final treatments and the view of the path on top of this bridge. And the top section here shows the path as it goes behind 7 Channing Road. You can see there's a significant grade change here. You've got the parking lot for 7 Channing Road down below. This is supported by a retaining wall. We're proposing some rock fill to stabilize this slope as we build the path up on the top of the slope here. And again, maintaining that 10-foot minimum setback requirement from the MBTA's tracks, where we would place a fence and or wood rails where necessary. One of the items that's still in the study phase, these haven't been shown on the plans, it hasn't been worked out yet, but we've been asked to look at an additional connection on the east side of the bridge. One of the options we looked at was connecting the sidewalk to the west of the existing bank and then traveling up with a nice curve to meet the path. And we're still having trouble meeting that ADA requirement of keeping it at less than 5 feet because it's a steep slope and the path is at a much higher elevation. This would also impact some of the parking stalls within the area. It would divide the access from the bank to the ATM, where people would have to walk across the bike path. And these pink lines represent some retaining walls that would be needed in order to construct this. So this alignment's less than desirable, but just wanted to show that as one of the study alignments we're looking at. We're also asked to look at another potential connection, which would be a narrower connection between 7 Channing Road and 19 Channing Road, and it wouldn't quite be meet bike path standards. We're looking at some possible alignment held up with retaining walls, and again, it's being difficult to meet that 5% maximum allowed by ADA. So we just wanted to show that these are in the study phase and would certainly require some coordination with the actual property owners before anything like this was implemented. But again, just wanted to share something that we're still looking at because it's something that's been brought up in the comments. As the path continues to the east, this is a representative section of the path as it runs between Concord Ave to the west all the way to Brighton Street. Again, we're showing this path at least 10 feet away from the tracks. We've actually situated it in this area. It's 16.5 feet from the tracks. You've got your 12-foot wide paved path with a 4-foot shoulder on the north and a 2-foot shoulder on the south, separated by a chain link fence. And again, we're showing that this area here, the Belmont Citizen Forum land, that's more vegetated than this area we're showing the path, so that we can preserve that vegetation behind all of the Channing Road butters. And here's a cross-section of that shows that we're further away from the tracks than the 10-foot minimum, proposed chain link fence separating the path, 12-foot paved path with a 4-foot shoulder, right now shown as loam and seed, and the swale and the subdrain to capture the drainage. And all of this in this area is proposed within the MBTA layout, where this vegetation limit here will only be affected by a few feet, as opposed to if the path were constructed within the Belmont Citizens Forum property, which is sloped, would require a lot more excavation and a lot more removal of vegetation, which is why we're proposing to put it in this location.
So one of the things we were able to do, and I apologize for not mentioning this earlier, but certainly at the western end of the site, we haven't had the ability to meet with the butters in person But the photographs you're seeing here in the upper left is really was a part of the meeting we had back in November. People were really helpful and allowed us to go into their backyards, shoot some pictures of existing conditions, which is what you see in the upper left. So what we did is really kind of superimposed a 6-foot fence element that you start to see kind of in that lighter green in the second photo, which is the proposed conditions. So essentially, at this particular location, and this is probably where the bike path itself or the multi-use path is at the highest point relative to the grades and the residents to the I guess it would be to your back in this particular photo. But you start to get an idea and of the kind of the character, if you will, of the screening. We're looking to be able to plant additional shrubs and more of an ornamental scale tree to help kind of minimize that. This particular lot has got some fairly big trees, which is great. And as John mentioned, within the Citizens Forum property line, the ability to have that path pulled back behind that primarily on MBTA land allows us to be able to really do our best to be able to save the tree canopy there. And those are really valuable, I'm sure, from both a shading component as well as just giving some privacy across the back of those lots. So I think those are great things. And I think the ability to have that path closer to the MBTA property is really beneficial in being able to protect and maintain as many of those trees as possible. I will say that the survey work is not complete within the areas on the T itself. So what we want to be able to do is we further develop the plans as we understand the grading and specifically any locations of, any of these really big, spectacular specimen, what I'll call trees. What we want to do is once we get into the more of the lot by lot and the survey work to be able to locate, identify those trees and see what we can do likewise to be able to rework the grading where possible to be able to save as many of those as possible. But those would be trees that would really be more on the MBTA property right now. I'm going to guess that a majority of, if not most, on the Citizens property, or excuse me, Citizens Forum property will be intact, which is a really a good thing. And then what you're seeing in the lower section through there is really the relationship once again of the path relative to the homes, and we've tried to scale the height of the homes and the number of stories and make that specific to this particular location. And the trees that you see back in a little more of the screened or the gray tone are the best we've been able to identify at the moment that are existing. And then what you're starting to see more in the light greens, if you will, are proposed trees ornamental, and maybe it's probably a mixture of some canopy trees as well. And then where we can and where it doesn't interrupt the grass swale, we want to be able to bring some trees on the path side of that screen as well. I think the ability to make this both a positive from the abutters and their backyards and their privacy and their screening is great, and we'll do everything we can to help with that. But I think also to be able to think about the path user so it doesn't feel like a kind of a tunnel or a walled edge, so that should be certainly an enjoyable experience from the walkers, joggers, and the bike users as well within the path. So really thinking about this as a two-sided element and a public amenity for everybody. And then finally, and you'll see this in all of the sections here, is from the person, I guess this particular one is on a bike itself, but there's dashed lines that you can see in that section. And what those are really based off of is right about probably in general about a 6-foot person. And that bottom line, actually, that is a view line, if you will. And what we're really trying to show is that a person about 6 feet in height on the path, what they can see that is above the 6-foot screen right there. So in this particular case, at 35 Channing, you're really getting a screening from the windows that are on the top floor. Their view is really kind of catching the roof line to the 35 Channing particular residence. So we're really trying to help kind of hopefully illustrate how the path, how the screen, and how that would certainly affect the residents or the abutter in each of the locations as we work our way down. But as I mentioned, we want to be able to definitely do this at the western end of the corridor as well. We just weren't able to do that. This was back in November, kind of late when we got this. And then certainly, as we all know, COVID hit. and it's really kind of prevented us from doing a little bit more of this field work. But these are the same conversations we definitely want to have with the folks who are down at the western end of the phase one part of the path as well. Yeah, thank you, John. I didn't even realize the screen changed. So yeah, this was another shot. This would be down a little bit further down at 61 Channing. And as you can see, the path is about the same height relative to the tracks. At this particular case, at 61, the residence is lower. And honestly, with the people on the path, and once again looking at that 6-foot high fence, the view is once again really looking more at the sky and up above the residents at that particular location. And we're still looking to be able to get additional screening in on the sloped area to kind of fill in the void, if you will, between the Citizens Forum property and the new fence, the screen there. We want to be able to start thinking once again about plant material, what that is. We want to be able to stabilize those slopes to make sure we're not doing anything to improve or negatively impact any of the soil slopes for stabilization, so we don't have any erosion issues. So really kind of knitting that all back together and making it feel like it's really a uniform green space in people's backyards. We realize there are some that have privacy fences back here. This particular residence doesn't. They've got more of some look like arborvitae that are starting to create that green hedge. But yeah, there's definitely obviously a mix that we were able to see when we were on site, which was really helpful for us as a part of the design to understand really the case-by-case conditions, which is really helpful. So once again, if any of those people are here tonight, we certainly appreciate your help and would love to kind of continue the conversations with you as we go forward. Yeah, so here's one that we've got kind of a chain link fence on the left-hand side of the photo in the existing, and then to the abutter next door is got a higher wood privacy fence at the back of the lots there. So obviously things are a little more open given the slope with some really, really nice big trees, which are amazing. But I think there's probably some opportunities here to add some lower level ornamental trees, exactly, to be able to kind of supplement the tree canopy that we have. Once again, we've superimposed the fence being about 6 feet tall. And once again, we would be looking to really kind of add plant material in front of that to kind of, once again, help minimize that, add the privacy, and then once again, really kind of green up that edge as well. And as you can see here, relative to the section, here the path is actually much lower than the tracks. And so it's dropping down and it's really an existing condition. So with the same kind of 6-foot person, what you're starting to get here, still really good privacy in the backyards, but you're starting to get a little bit lower and you're really kind of catching, just I would call just right around the eaves line of the house, maybe just a little bit lower, but majority of the space is still getting a lot of privacy. John, are you there? Or did you mute?
Oh, sorry, I muted myself. Thanks. So one of the major components of phase one of this project is known as phase 1A, which is the underpass that's to be constructed underneath the active railroad tracks. One of the other comments from the MBTA when we met with them, our concept design report that we submitted looked at 2 options. One was tunnel jacking, which would jack a tunnel underneath the active tracks and maintain the integrity of the tracks above. The other option we looked at, which would accelerate construction, would be to cut the tracks, do an open cut and then drop a culvert in and cover it back up, which we thought added some benefits to construction time and cost. Unfortunately, the MBTA hasn't had much luck with that due to the settlement of the new soils that are put in. So they really want to maintain that integrity of the track as well as the gravel base that's underneath the existing tracks and ties. So they very strongly stated that they would only support the tunnel jacking method. So we've gone forward with a 25% design proposal to jack a new underpass underneath the existing tracks. One of the decisions was to shorten the length of that, to shorten the duration of the tunnel jacking, which we're told can take about, they can jack about 3 linear feet per day. So we're looking at possibly up to 3 weeks to jack this tunnel underneath the tracks. It also, by shortening this tunnel, helps to improve the sight lines. Another one of our concerns was that path users or bicyclists on the main path wouldn't have a good view of users coming out of the tunnel. So what we've done is we've tried to open this area up to improve those sight lines. The path itself will actually drop down to meet this proposed circular traffic pattern that we're creating for the bikes, similar to a roadway traffic circle or roundabout. So as bicyclists are coming downhill, we want them to slow down, and we want them to be able to merge, as well as have a good line of sight for anybody that's coming south from Channing Road or coming out of the actual tunnel from the middle and high school. So this circular pattern will slow the bicyclists down. Also, we provide ample room for walkers and joggers and other means of transportation, but also presents an opportunity for some landscaping and to really clean this area up. So we like that this area will be relatively flat. We are proposing that this path that comes down along the existing Alexander Avenue layout, so it's entirely within property that's owned by the town of Belmont, will come down gradual enough so that it will meet ADA accessibility requirements and continue through the path. And again, these pink lines here are representative of retaining walls. So what we're showing now are retaining walls to support the private property, which will actually be up higher than the path. Right now, we're proposing these should be stone masonry walls. So they'd have a stone, cemented stone finish with a cap on top of the wall that would allow for the installation of a chain link fence so that people couldn't climb up over the wall or jump off the walls. These are the extensions of the wing walls for the underpass, as well as an extension of a retaining wall to support the fill on the high side or the track side of the path as this path climbs back up to meet the grade that we were showing on the previous slide. And as the path continues through the Belmont High and Middle School property, the path will continue southward. It'll connect to the proposed sidewalk that's being constructed as part of the parking area for the new schools. And then it'll continue down. And then we're showing a modified connection as the path terminates at the driveway to the school and Concord Avenue with a wider wheelchair ramp so that it can accommodate bicyclists. And then we'll also work out pavement markings so that bicyclists and pedestrians can utilize the crossings that are being constructed at this intersection as part of the school project.
So this will give you a little bit better idea of the walls that we're talking about. So the section that's on the lower portion is actually the one that's in the site plan above, the wider one that's a little bit lower in the sheet. So you're starting to see the planting there in the center that's a part of the roundabout kind of form that John was just discussing, looking at getting plant material in there, trees, kind of vertical elements to help with the screening and also to be able to soften the space and bring down the scale. We're still trying to keep really good visibility. So anything that we would be planting on the, what I'll call the understory, the shrubs, that layer would be something that would stay primarily underneath the 2.5 to maybe 3 feet max kind of a height. And then once again, this is all about perceived and safety as you start to get into the taller trees, making sure that we've got really nice, clear trunks that would be in the 7 to 8 foot height range so that anybody walking through there would have really good sight lines and feel comfortable. Obviously, with the height of those walls, it starts to feel a little enclosed. So what we want to do is make sure that we've got a really comfortable and a safe environment to invite people to use that space and also make that a very safe space as well. So once again, and then trying to get some plant material, and we're showing evergreen, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. But looking at starting to get some plant material and trees that would be in front of those walls to help diminish some of the scale, soften those up, and just to bring those down and make it feel a little more part of the neighborhood. So, I should say we had really good conversations with a lot of people back in November, and we hope to continue those dialogues. Everything we're showing here at the moment is purely just a concept or a thought, and it's something that we would love to be able to have those ongoing discussions with the neighbors as the plans get more and more developed. And then section 9, it's in the upper right, is the section that's actually a little bit further out towards Channing. It's the narrower section, but once again, the walls are fairly short at that location. And once again, really just wanting to meet with the abutters on both sides of the properties. I know we had a really good conversation with the gentleman that lived on the right side. So having those kind of dialogues to make sure that they're comfortable with the approach and how this path is connecting out to Channing and certainly going very close to their properties.
And then these would be a cross-sectional view of that path that Sean just described, with the stone masonry wall constructed within the town or Belmont Citizens Forum properties, as well as preserving that backyards of these abutters. It shows the trail, and then in this section it would be sloping to meet the elevation off to the north of the tracks, but we've also superimposed what that underpass would look like underneath the tracks in this cross section as well, so you can get an idea of how that section will look and how it's pitched towards the middle and high school property. And then this would be that section, the approach from Channing Road that Sean had shown with the landscaping, but this gives you an idea of how that path itself is going to be lower, and then these retaining walls will protrude up a little bit to protect the property and avoid impacts to the abutting properties.
And I think, John, I should have mentioned with the notion of this being lowered, I mean, it certainly further diminishes the kind of the visibility into the adjacent properties as opposed to it being at grade, which would be much more visible. So I think the grades are working in our favor to kind of help lower that, make your connection underneath through the tunnel, but also help diminish some of the prominence, if you will, of that path and connection from Channing to the path, and a little easier, I think, to kind of screen and diminish the impact of the path to certainly the neighbors on both sides.
Yeah, that's a great point. And this gives you an idea of what the underpass looks like with the wing walls that I explained that would help support that slope. It shows the relationship of the active commuter rail up above. We're maintaining 3 to 5 feet of cover underneath the tracks. When we jack this tunnel, we're showing it to be 10 feet wide with a 9-foot minimum height to get through, which is acceptable to MassDOT. And then we're also proposing lighting within the underpass. As of now, we haven't proposed lighting along the path, but I know that's a comment that's come up, and I'm sure there'll be further discussions with the town as to whether or not to include lighting as part of the path project, or whether just to light the proposed underpass. And then this was a profile that was developed by GZA, our geotechnical subconsultant, following the borings that they performed on either side. So this dashed box represents the approximate location of the underpass that will be jacked underneath the existing track. And what we learned is that this proposed jacked underpass will sit on top of a stiff clay layer, which is identified in this yellow pattern, which they said is a good supporting material for this tunnel. So that works in our favor for the jacking and for supporting the tunnel on top of that stiff clay layer, which is identified as the yellow area. And then they found a softer clay layer down below, but we'll be well above that with our proposed tunnel jacking. And then this shows in red the proposed excavations or the jacking pits that would be required. want a rectangular on the Belmont Middle and High School property side, and then another jacking pit on the north side in order to install the equipment required to jack this tunnel underneath the active railroad.
And then, yeah, a little bit further down, kind of once again, really trying to show the residents. Sorry, you threw me off a little bit there. We're all the way to the right-hand side of the plan there, so I apologize on that. So I was looking at the roundabout again. Yeah, exactly. Sorry about that. So once again, kind of as we're walking down Channing from west to east, the overall path is starting to get lower as we're going to get closer down to the intersection and the crossing there, I should say. But once again, with the ability to have the 6-foot screening element where it gets us a really good privacy sightline for people's backyards. Once again, you're really blocked, and in this case, it's more of a single-story home, but you're really looking over that. And as we've mentioned before, the trees that are toned out more on the gray, there's some big, beautiful existing that are certainly going to be able to remain, which is awesome. And then what we want to be able to do is supplement that as well and kind of give potentially some more seasonal color. It's once again something we would want to be able to work with the homeowner and make sure that they're comfortable, but certainly be able to supplement the plant material that's along that edge as well. And likewise here as well, to be able to get some of that plant material on the path side of the screen element as well. Just so once again, we're really trying to soften that edge, and it would be really preferred to have that screening element almost disappear and let the vegetation be the predominant kind of character along the edge. A green edge would be, at least in our minds, much visually much nicer and less prominent at being able to provide the screening and let the fence be there, but not necessarily be as prominent. And then down at 241, you can see obviously this is another one of the properties that does have their own, I'm guessing it's probably in the neighborhood of an 8-foot fence that's around their back. If I remember correctly, this is also the home with a pool, I believe. So as you get to this kind of the proposed conditions, you've got the white existing fence on the lower level there. And what you're starting to see then would be the 6-foot screening in the background with some additional trees to once again kind of soften that overall character without really getting to a point where we're cutting out any of certainly the light with the deciduous trees that we definitely heard as a part of the walk back in November. And then likewise, it's still fairly low with the path height. As you can see, the tracks are actually dropping down here as well. But once again, with the 6-foot fence at this particular location, you're still really getting some pretty good, I would say, privacy in the backyards. And based on where that kind of the vision line, if you will, continues up, getting some good privacy likewise into the second floor windows as well, in the particular home at 241. And then if we move down just a little bit further at 271, once again, the home is looks like 2.5 stories based on what we were able to kind of get between photographs and the survey. Once again, some really beautiful existing trees that you can see in the existing as well as the proposed conditions on the property. Obviously, those trees are on the property well within the fence line, but you can see some of the bigger trees on the kind of the right side of that photograph, and likewise, yeah, where John's highlighting, there's some big, beautiful canopy trees that we do not want to be able to disturb and let those remain in place, and just to kind of continue to build upon that overall character and certainly the privacy that those do provide to the home.
Thanks, Sean. As the path continues towards Brighton Street, the path will shift closer to the tracks. As I'd mentioned, we're staying typically 22 feet away from the tracks, and then we're going to gradually shift it to meet that 10-foot clearance requirement as we pass by 40 and 42 Brighton Street. So as this path crosses to traverse between this building while staying 10 feet from the existing tracks, we are going to need an easement through here based on this alignment as we showed it in order for that shift to occur. So again, as I mentioned, all these easements will need to be worked out with the individual property owners so that we can finalize the alignment. You can see as the path continues along the building, we're going to actually narrow the actual paved width to 10 or 11 feet through here. I'll show that on a cross section. And then as that alignment continues along the driveway entrance to 4042 Brighton Street, it's going to cross Brighton Street. And in our concept design report, we looked at several different options for how to handle and improve safety at this crossing, not only for vehicles, but also for the trail users. And what we are proposing is to install a full traffic signal. And one of the items that the MBTA felt strongly about was that when the train comes through here, they want the gates to go down and they want the vehicles to stop, but they also want path users to be stopped. So we're going to look at tying in this traffic signal system with the existing train system, so that when a train comes through here and the lights, the red lights go off, the crossing gates come down, we want to stop all movement. The train goes by fairly quickly, and the MBTA feels strongly that it would be safest if trail users aren't trying to cross the path and then be tempted to try to take a right or a left turn across the tracks as the train is coming through. So that's something that we're working on, and the timing and how this works with the train as it comes through. But this new signal system will be tied into the train crossing. Another element that we're adding in is called queue detection. And so a couple hundred feet in advance of the intersection on either side, there'll be a detector that will detect if traffic starts backing up. And what will happen is we'll be able to stop that traffic when it's backing up so that it doesn't get stuck on the tracks. So that's another component of this system that we'll be building in, so that there will be a light and it will stop vehicles from queuing up so that they don't get stuck on the tracks when the train is coming through.
So this is really kind of trying to do a kind of a superimposed layer, if you will. The photo on the left, obviously being the existing conditions where the path has got a little widened kind of beginning point, if you will, or I guess in our particular case, it's the end, if you will. And as the proposed condition there on the right, there's the continuity of going through there. What we haven't been able to lay in yet is some of the stamped asphalt kind of traffic calming and directional components that you start to see in the photograph, or the plan, I should say, in the upper left. We have layered in kind of the elements. We're showing those in green within the proposed conditions within the street there. We're really just using green, to be honest, to make those a little easier to show up. Certainly not intending to have plant material within that street. It's a pretty tough environment for plant material to do anything given the scale and the placement, but certainly the traffic calming and using those elements to really help direct traffic and movements through there for both the bikes as well as the vehicles at that particular location. And then you're also going to start to see some of the pavement markings that will also help further identify those connecting elements from where the path currently ends to where we're able to continue that path further to the west.
And then this will be the section of the path as it travels between the MBTA tracks and 40 and 42 Brighton Street. We're governed by that 10-foot setback requirement from the outside track, so that the MBTA has the room that they need if they have to do track or tie maintenance. So we're not showing the full 12-foot wide pavement here. We're showing it to be effectively a 10-foot wide trail, although we will be paving another 1-foot shoulder and approximately a 1.5-foot shoulder on the south side. So you will have over 12 feet of paved, but it's really considered only a 10-foot wide path width because of the shoulders, because there's a building that's a hard obstruction, and then the chain link fence or possibly a solid barrier since we're going to be in such close proximity to the tracks in this location. And this is proposed to exist within the existing path easement that has already been secured by the town for the purpose of constructing the path along this property. And again, we're still continuing that proposed subdrain that we've been looking at to make sure that we can convey any stormwater that could be collected by the path. And then, as I mentioned, this is a high-level stormwater analysis that we're working on the final design and the actual permitting to implement this. But we've divided up the entire project into essentially 3 segments. So this segment down between Clark Street and Belmont Center can be collected by that new swale and subdrain system and then tied into the existing town system here. And then it'll follow along the existing town system, which consists of a stream and some culverts, and then ultimately outlets into Clay Pit Pond. The second drainage catchment area we're looking at extends from the Concord Ave Bridge and then extends approximately to halfway through the Belmont Middle and High School property. And then it will capture this runoff. It'll also capture the runoff in this underpass area. And the drainage will be collected and then tied into the new system that's being constructed for the Belmont Middle and High School. And again, that system ultimately discharges into Clay Pit Pond as well. And then the third catchment area we're looking at continues from the Belmont Middle and High School, and then will continue to the east, and again tie into the existing system here in Brighton Street, and then ultimately the outlet to the pond to the north. And as I'd mentioned, we're looking at variable heights, but also different components of chain link fence material. We're looking at chain link fence, whether it has a tighter mesh or some sort of screening in there as well that can help with privacy, as well as dust or debris that gets kicked up from the train. There's also another protective shield option that we're looking into. And again, we talked about whether or not there would be a solid barrier when we get relatively close to the tracks. And the MBTA suggested that we look into fiberglass panels, which would be lighter and easier to remove in the event of a maintenance project, as opposed to doing a solid wood barrier or something made out of concrete material. So that was one of the materials that was suggested by the MBTA, and we're still finalizing what precise material will be used in these areas. And then just to summarize, the scope of the project, so we're proposing a 12-foot wide paved path with a 4-foot shoulder along the north side, a 2-foot shoulder on the south side, a new drainage swale and subdrain system to collect any runoff that runs off from the new trail, where the underpass crossing below the railroad tracks is proposed to be utilize tunnel jacking. We're approximating about a 3-week duration, about 2 weeks of prep time, which would include excavating out the jacking pits and setting up all the equipment. And our estimated cost for the underpass, the jacking pits, and the structure itself is about $4 million just for that underpass that goes underneath the tracks. We are proposing to light the underpass. We're proposing to improve the safety at the crossing of Brighton Street with new signals and gates. We've got improved landscape and screening along the corridor that Sean described this evening. We're proposing to landscape and treat the different trailheads or connections to the path. As I mentioned, that's still something that'll be finalized with input from the community, with the town, and we can find out exactly what the flavor is for these trailhead connections. As Isabel mentioned, we'll look at whether or not we need bike racks at these locations for people to leave their bikes if they're going, say, shopping in Belmont Center or going to a restaurant. We'd also need to coordinate any proposed easements, whether they're temporary or permanent. We'll need to coordinate easements with the MBTA and MassDOT, as well as any private property owners that would be impacted. And right now we're looking at a an estimated project cost of approximately $20 million. And we've gone through, and that's based on the design we have today, the grades and the retaining walls and all of the improvements that we're proposing. So our next steps following this meeting, we'll continue to review the public comments that are submitted through our website, as well as at the end of this meeting tonight. We'll complete those soil borings that we need to do along the MBTA property for the proposed retaining walls. And then we'll be submitting that 25% design to MassDOT. As I mentioned, they take about 90 days typically for a review of a submission. So once we get the comments from them, we'll have to address those comments to their satisfaction, and then they will schedule their formal design public hearing, which we're anticipating to happen this winter. And again, thank you. Hopefully this was informative, as well as providing you an opportunity now to provide comments. We would really prefer that you, in addition to this evening, that you log into our website, look closer at the plans. Please submit any comments or questions that you have, and that way we can be sure to go over all of them and develop responses, and then work with the town and the committee. We also invite you to take our survey on the project website and sign up also at belmontcommunitypath.com and subscribe for the updates that we'll offer from our website. So with that, that ends our presentation this evening, and I want to thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much, John and Sean and Isabel, for that presentation. I again really hope folks found it informative. I am going to go ahead and turn it over to Patrice now to call on folks who may have a comment or a question that they'd like to ask the niche team.
Sure. Thanks, Wes. Patrice Garvin, Town Administrator. We have a number of hands up, and we also have some written questions that were that had come in over the past hour. So I'm going to start with the hands. I'm going to go in order as they've been received. So Naomi Akugawa, I'm going to allow you to speak. If you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, I have two questions. So first, we did on the section 1. Then last time with sidewalk, our section was not included. Then what is the best way to schedule an avatar meeting with you? Can you hear me? Yes.
Nope, yeah. This is John Michalak. I guess what happened was we were planning on having site walks, but then COVID-19 happened. So we do want to stress that we do want to meet with people eventually. We may need to wait until that's deemed to be safer. I know a lot of people don't want to have social interaction now with COVID-19. So there will be plenty of opportunity to meet with you. But in the meantime, we'd encourage you to submit your comments to our website or ask questions. And that will be the best way for us to answer questions right now until there's a time when we...
Yeah, also another question is, I'm wondering, I just need some clarification from someone why the path will be... Hello?
Are you still there?
Yes, I am, but I think someone muted me. Oh, yeah, I think I can talk. So I'm just wondering, so we are wondering why a committee decided to put the path on the north side, because other side is a town's field. Then I think our neighbor asked this question at the CBPC meeting before, but I think Russ told us it is too late and it's not time to discuss. So I just wondering, what does it mean? So I cannot find any information why those decision was made. Then also, I don't know why it's too late, then we cannot change. So basically, we did not have any opportunity to talk to anyone because we are not included in the Avatar sidewalk.
So, I mean, this is Russ. I can
Right.
try to address that. I mentioned during my introduction that at the conclusion of the feasibility study, which again was submitted to the town in 2017, at the end of 2017.
Right. Yes.
The select board engaged in a pretty lengthy deliberative process about where to locate the path alignment over the course of really the next year. It took about a year to do that. So there was a lot of public discussion and debate at the select board level. Those discussions are pretty well memorialized in the select board minutes from that time frame. So but ultimately the Belmont Select Board made that decision in, I want to say, April of 2019, somewhere around there, late spring of 2019, a little more than a year ago. So what Niche has done really is designed the path that the town asked them to design. So if you're interested in how that decision was made, I would encourage you to check out those minutes from the select board meetings from that time frame. I'm sure we can figure out which ones they are, but that's the basic answer to your question.
Okay, so Selectman decided then it's not like a public, it's not open discussion. Okay, thank you.
So I guess I want to answer just a little bit more to your first question, though. So John had mentioned definitely to send in questions. I think that's awesome. You definitely should do that for some immediate, but I would say also as a part of those questions, I would just ask something about when could we meet, and so that we've got you and an address so that we kind of know where you are. We can keep track of that information. So when the opportunity arises, we can have those follow-up conversations with you. It'd be really helpful.
Great. The next question is from Sue Bass. Sue, can you go ahead?
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yep.
Yeah.
As Patrice said, I'm Sue Bass. I'm a Precinct 3 town meeting member, and I live about a block from the tracks near Belmont Center. I am very impressed with what you've done. I think you're doing a great job. But now I'm going to tell you what I don't like so much, and that is chain link fences. Both, they are not extremely secure. I mean, people do have bolt cutters to cut through them, but also they're ugly. And I would really, the Belmont Citizens Forum, I used to be on the board, but it's been a decade probably since I left the board. But before that, when I was still on the board, we sent out a mailing with some fencing and an illustration of what the path might look like. And that had a vertical metal slats as the fence. And I don't know if that would cost more, but I think it would be very much prettier. It certainly was in the pictures we used. If you can substitute that for the chain link fence and the whole length of the thing. I mean, what you do right at the French and Mahoney property is perhaps a different story, but the rest of the thing, you said chain link fence here, chain link fence there, they're really ugly. The second thing I wanted to ask about, or I wanted to really comment on, is that I hope you can do a connection to Belmont Center from the east end of Belmont Center, where the real estate office is, was it 7 Channing Road? In there, I know it's a challenge, but it would make a huge difference to the traffic in Belmont Center. You know, people who are going to one side, to a restaurant on one side of the center should, if possible, not have to cross the street in the middle of the traffic from the existing stone bridge. That, as I mentioned in many earlier meetings, is a high accident rate area. Now, the accidents are normally at 5 miles an hour, 7 miles an hour. They're fender benders. There's a lot of traffic going through there, though. And, you know, a 5 mile an hour car, if it hits another car, it's not going to do much damage. But if it hits a bike or a person, it can be a lot more devastating. And so it would really be an important safety feature if you could have 2 exits at Belmont Center from the path to the center. And I recall, I used to go to planning board meetings a lot, and I recall planning board meetings with probably a former owner of that property. I don't know who owns it now, but when they came for planning permission, they invariably said, oh, yes, so we want to cooperate with the path. So I would think that it would be worth talking to Coldwell Banker. You're going to have to anyhow. But to see what can be done to make a safe exit from the path, entrance to the path on the east side of Belmont Center. And other than that, thank you so much. I really appreciate your work, and I look forward to seeing more of it.
Great, thanks, Sue. Up next, we have Melissa McIntyre. Melissa?
Hi, I'm Melissa McIntyre. Actually, my wife has her Zoom set up to be Melissa McIntyre. I'm Robert McIntyre, her husband. I was going to say the thing that Sue just said about the west end, the sort of east end of Belmont Center. But since she covered that very well, the other thing I did want to talk about is the railroad crossing at the other end, near Brighton Street. I think you said something about the MBTA wants all the paths blocked when the train is going by. I don't really understand that, because right now, when you're on the path, the absolute safest time to cross Brighton Street is when the train is going by, because all the cars are stopped and you're right there on the other side of the gate from where the train is. So you're perfectly safe from the train and you're very safe from the cars. It's absolutely the safest time to cross that street right now is when the train is going past. So I'm a little confused at what are they planning to move the gate to the other side? So that there's a sort of big box in front of the bike path would no longer be on the near sort of far side of the fence, or why would they want to not allow bicycles to pass while the train is going?
This is John. They expressed a concern about bicyclists not just crossing, but also trying to take a right or left turn. So, I mean, it's not, again, like I want to stress, we're pre-25%. It's not set in stone. We're going to have to work out some sort of timing also for those gates. And then possibly, the gates can let the trail users cross before the vehicles are allowed to move. But we do know that there's heavy traffic there. So that's additional traffic analysis that'll need to be done. But since it will be a full signal, we think that there will be an opportunity to also, allow the trail users to cross and even access the path, maybe even cross the tracks before the vehicles are allowed to move. But again, that's something that's still in the works. But they did just stress that concern. They just don't want the bicyclists moving while the train comes through, and it happens fairly quickly. So I don't think it's going to be a huge delay for people to just wait for the train to go through.
Yeah, it's only sort of disappointing because right now it's the safest time to cross because of course the cars can't go.
Yeah, understood. And then we work on the timing. We'll have additional meetings with MassDOT and the MBTA and go over what's safest for everybody there.
Yeah, I mean certainly they want to have a full gate between the if they did let you cross, they'd want to have a full gate between the bike path and the train tracks.
Mm-hmm. Yep, thanks.
And by the way, I'm super excited about the path itself. That's the obvious thing, but and thank for all the great work. These designs are really beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Up next, we have Jared. Jared.
This is Jared Gensel. First of all, I want to say thank you to Niche for incorporating a lot of these design drawings. A lot of us who followed this path progress for the years have been waiting to be able to start seeing the path, and tonight we started seeing a lot of really interesting drawings. So I look forward to more to that. My question's related to that. There was discussion about how moving on to the 75% design and so forth, there will be more discussion and engagement about things like enhancing the green space in Belmont Center. Can you comment about a little bit more about how that public engagement might happen going forward so we can engage more, the community can engage more in that design process?
Well, I mean, I know we're going to have another public information meeting. Hopefully we're meeting in person by then, because I think it would be easier to break into groups, allow people to provide input on specific segments. If not, maybe we have to figure out how to facilitate something that gets that input and allows people to speak in a virtual setting. But I think it all depends on the pandemic and where we're at when we're at the 75% phase next year and talking about these details. But we really want public input. I mean, I really can't say where we'll be with the pandemic, but what I would envision is, more of a open public meeting where kind of like design charrette style, where people can go to a table where we have a specific segment or trailhead and allow people to make suggestions or, provide input on what they'd like to see there. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's how I'd like to see it. Right?
Is there a time frame for this, for that kind of engagement?
I mean, 75% will happen once MassDOT has their design public hearing. So I think that once there will be additional opportunities for public comment in the design public hearing phase. Then we'll take those into consideration and then work with the committee and the town as to, when the best time would be to have that next public information meeting. So
I'd encourage also trying to leverage, there's a lot of new virtual platforms. A lot of people are finding new ways to work. So maybe encouraging, try to be creative to the extent possible. I think that the Mass DOT is exploring some new platforms for this kind of public engagement, might be worth considering as well. But anyway, love the active and community engagement, especially around specific designs. Looking forward to that. And also looking forward to moving on to phase 2, so we can complete the path through town. Make this really a good connection across the network of communities.
And Jared, just to add to that, I'm sorry, Patrice. I think the thinking through what public engagement might look like for the next phase of this is something that the CPPC will be working on too. So, if you have ideas, obviously we're interested in hearing them. But, as John said, a lot, I think, will depend on how the COVID situation progresses, and a lot of what we can do will depend on that. But like you said, there's probably some good alternative things to explore. So it's something I know the committee will be working on as well.
Up next is Priscilla Hunt. Priscilla.
All right, hi. I have two questions. One, I posted on the question and answers about the environmental concerns. Did you consider permeable pavement at all? Because you're putting a lot of pavement down. The permeable pavement helps with the water absorption.
Yeah, we could consider that. I know that permeable pavement requires maintenance though, so that's something we'd have to talk to the town and DPW about. Right now, we're thinking that, if the path is 12 feet wide, we can collect that in an adjacent swale. That's what we're looking at right now, but
even regular asphalt or any kind of pavement requires maintenance. I know that because I have troubles here. The other question I have is, I like the path and everything. I'm not debating it or anything like that, but I was wondering, I've been living here since 2004 and I've never received any kind of notice. Maybe I'm not really in a butter of the path because I back up to Beaverbrook Reservation, but did the abutters all receive notice in mail and otherwise, not just newspaper notices? I'm just curious how the abutters were notified. Did you hear me?
Priscilla, this is Russ. Are you asking how they were notified of what exactly?
Of the plans and how their properties were being impacted? I mean, how did they receive notification? How did you notify them? Just curious, because that lady seemed to be the first lady that questioned. I was concerned that she didn't even know anything about it. So,
yeah. So again, the path process has been ongoing for many years now. There were more than 10 public meetings such as this one during the feasibility study process over the course of an entire year. For the site walk that the niche team conducted back in November, each of those abutters were notified by mail, I believe. Someone will correct me if I'm wrong about that, but an attempt was made to individually notify them, and there was good turnout. As John and Sean mentioned earlier during the presentation, we had hoped to hold additional site walks. Obviously, that first one was focused on Channing Road. I believe the individual who spoke earlier is located on the western terminus of the path or nearer to there. We have not held a site walk there yet, and certainly hope to do so or find another way to engage with that section. But there have over the course of the years that this project has been underway, I can't stress enough how many opportunities there have been to engage. And again, this is not a final chance either. There will be many more opportunities to engage and provide input into the design as it progresses forward.
Okay, one quick question. There's been 2 home invasions in Belmont. One was on Channing Road because they have it's a good opportunity to come in from that area. The other wasn't on Stoltz. But are there going to be videotaping of the area, or is there going to be police presence? Has anyone looked into that at all? Because I back up to the Beaverbrook Reservation, And there is some activity that goes on, but thank goodness I have a brook between me and the Beaverbrook Reservation. So, you know, there is activity that I have to report on sometimes at 2 and 3 in the morning. I'm concerned, you know, with fires, things like that. So has anyone looked into any of the policing or anything like that? You know, the ramifications of having this pathway? Has any study been done?
Russ, I can take that. Priscilla, you had asked that in the question and answer section of the program, and I answered it. The police department is very much well aware of the path and the path design. We're currently in the design phase of this project. Something like that has to be looked at a little bit more in depth, and with the police chief, with the police department, and we just aren't there. It's a little premature to be asking a question such as that.
Patrice, if I could, I will just add to that Priscilla, if you're interested in some of the research about, you know, crime and paths, the first volunteer committee that the town convened on this, the Community Path Advisory Committee, produced a report, and included in that report are some pretty extensive appendices of research they collected on that particular issue. That's available on the town's website. So if you are interested in looking into some of that was work that one of the first committees that looked into this compiled.
All right, I'll look at that. All right, thank you.
Priscilla, you also have 3 other questions in the Q&A. I didn't know if you wanted to go through those.
No, I can wait. You can hit that later. It doesn't matter. I was mostly really concerned about what the fabric of the pavement is going to be. This would be an opportunity to really use the correct stuff, you know. I don't know what the difference in price would be, but I know it makes it. They have something on sinking cities, you know, the Thames River, the third episode. It talks about how they mitigate the water problem throughout the countryside. And one of the things they do talk is about, I believe I saw it there originally, about the permeable pavement. So there are things they've done that make a difference environmentally. And it's really sensitive in a lot of the areas here. I think a lot of people have water problems. I don't have a water problem in my house right yet, but I don't want to either. So.
I think that's one of the reasons why we're trying to collect the runoff rather than just let it go back into the ground. Because what we've heard from some of the abutters on Channing Road is that clay layer I talked about doesn't allow the groundwater to continue to get absorbed into the ground. So they get a lot of ponding. So I think it would benefit them if we actually did collect the runoff rather than let the runoff continue to
right, but I don't think it has to be one or the other. It could be both. It could be something to be considered.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Off the table, we'll definitely look at.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Priscilla. Up next is Eric.
Hi, my name is Eric Baccio. I live in the Winbrook neighborhood with my wife and our 2 daughters who are ages 1 and 3. And first, I'd just like to say that I support the path and I'm very pleased with the 25% design. My wife works in Cambridge and I work in Boston, and we plan to use the path to bike to Alewife Station and to walk to the Belmont Center station. And we're also very excited for the Alexander Ave Underpass connection, which will enable us to walk with our daughters quickly and safely to the Belmont Library. And we particularly appreciate the roundabout design for safety reasons. One comment I have is I think the design could be improved with a 16-foot wide paved path rather than 12 feet of paving and 4 feet of shoulder. And I think a wider path would be safer for bikers and runners and walkers who are using the path simultaneously, as runners and walkers are likely to use the paved portion of the path rather than the shoulder in many instances. So in locations where there is space for a 16-foot wide path, I would just urge the design team to revisit this option. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Up next is Carice.
Hello, My name is Carice Radine. I'm a resident of just up the hill from the police station. And I'm extremely excited about this project. I'm extremely excited about the progress that's being made after a long period of discussion of the path routing. One of the things that I'm extremely excited about is being able to cross over the sort of Gordian knot where Leonard Street and Concord Ave come together on a bicycle with small children. I have a 7-month-old, a 4-year-old, and a 6-year-old. And we love to go places by bicycle. There's no way I could imagine them going to Winbrook School across that intersection until they're 16. Hopefully this will be there before then. I love this idea that people are discussing of going through the east side town center access, especially for pedestrians. But if there is no east side access, I do think that this town you should coordinate with the town about people, bicyclists specifically, coming off of the path. How they come off the path, there's a crosswalk, and then where do they go? Are they just dumped back into that horrible intersection? Is there some opportunity for a contraflow bike lane in that sort of parking area in front of the bank? It's something beyond the scope of this project design, but I would really love that to be a larger area of discussion if there is no east side access. My fourth issue was drainage. I'm very concerned about drainage, especially actually in the winter. I ride very regularly on the Fitchburg Cutoff Path in Cambridge, and it becomes an ice rink in the winter because they plow it, and then there's a berm of snow on either side that prevents water from getting into any swale. And then it freezes at night, and there's no place for the water to go. So I wonder if there's some additional means that are not too expensive. You're running the drainage pipe all along there. If there are some locations for drainage grates as well as just the swale. Finally, my concern was, I have a question about, and you're talking, I'm very excited that it's going to be signalized at Brighton Street. And I'm wondring what the method to request the light will be for path users. And if it is a beg button, what the timing will be of that, so that people aren't waiting so long that they're tempted to cross against the light. Hello?
Yes, this is John.
A lot of questions, sorry.
So
thank you.
The signal, I think I would lean towards having them request the signal. It makes bicyclists stop rather than just go through. As far as the timing, we still need to work that out. There is a lot of vehicle traffic, so we need to be cognizant so we don't create, major traffic backups. So I can't answer that right now, but we will work out that timing as we finalize the design.
Is there any opportunity for grading, for trench drains or anything like that in addition to the swale?
Yeah, we can look at what we can do for that. I mean, if we did use a permeable pavement, then that would help in certain areas. We can look at whether there's areas where we can create maybe a more of a detention pond or area, that's larger, so that, when the snow is if it is plowed, it would get pushed away far enough so that the water would have somewhere to drain to. But yeah, we can take that comment you had about, creating icy areas and see what we can do. I think a lot of that will depend on the topography. Maybe at the higher locations, you won't run into that as much. Might be at a flatter or lower location. So we can certainly look into that drainage in more detail.
Yeah, and I think too, to be able to just speak to the overall kind of maintenance and how that influences the design as well, just to make sure. We definitely heard the comments and understand the ice issue in the winter, and making sure that's safe and as much of a 24/7 as we could, year-round element as possible. So yeah, it's definitely a valid. We need to make sure we can figure that out.
Thank you. I appreciate your work. It looks great.
Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Jessica?
Hi. Thanks for having this meeting. It was very detailed, more so than the previous one, so I really appreciate it. My email address, since you need it, is Jessica Lemay, JESSICA @gmail.com, in case anybody wants to chat offline also about this. I have 3 concerns, which I'll just go through and then you can address. So the first one is that Naomi and I haven't lived here very long, so of course we're not aware of the long history of trying to get this path built, right? And so I feel like we really would appreciate it if you could be able to succinctly explain to Naomi and myself in a nutshell why you decided not to pursue the South Side. She shouldn't have to go, especially in the COVID era, to try and unearth this information from town meetings many years ago. I think that's really putting the burden on the abutters in a way that doesn't really make sense to me, because I feel like you should just be able to give us a couple of lines that succinctly distill this information. The second thing I'm concerned about is the wide width of the path, especially here at Pleasant Street. And then finally, I wanted to get back to what Priscilla said. So in going through these woods over here between Pleasant and Royal Street, it is obvious that there is routine activity back there, especially at night, between Royal Street and Pleasant Street. There are beer bottles, fire pits, lawn chairs, et cetera. We have photos of them. There's already activity happening there. And so I would just urge the town to consider, I know you said that some studies were done about the impact of bicycle paths, but this project's also been in the works for 27 years. And so those studies may not even be up to date with many features of the current world. And so I would like to go back to that at some point, even if it is after the path has already been approved, and if it's a post-approval situation where we need to talk about what's happening on the path. And then finally, whether or not this is considered a linear park and what that means for the lighting situation. Thanks. That's it. I'm done.
Great. Thanks, Jessica. Sorry. Next is Cosmo. Cosmo, you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I wanted to respond to Priscilla's comment and the reply about talking to the police at a later point. I think now is precisely the time to talk to them because it would affect the design. A 6-foot-tall chain link fence has already been proven to have been repeatedly cut by the students at the high school. They've done it on the south side many, many times, and they repaired the fence until eventually the town gave up on repairing it. So it needs to be, if the police doesn't have input, it has to be something that they can't cut or climb over. It needs to be solid, probably about 8 feet, so that they can't climb over it. And the other thing that Priscilla had asked about and Russ had said was the first committee's report on the crime. And I just want to let her know that I was on that first committee, and the data on crime was it was bad quality data, in part because the police don't report the crime on the path. They report it by the house number, so it wasn't discernible. But nevertheless, in Arlington, the Minuteman, and also there had been reports of sex offenders in the newspaper and assaults, and also trespassing wasn't considered by a crime. But the big thing is the data it wasn't good data because it was reported by house number, not by what happens on the path. That's all.
So Cosmo, let me clarify my comments before. if I misspoke, I apologize. The police have been actively engaged in this project and will continue to be. I think Priscilla, what I was responding to was Priscilla asking about a specific plan to police the path once it is in place, which we don't have yet, which is premature. But the police department and the police chief have been actively engaged in this process and this project for quite some time.
We'll continue to coordinate with them.
Okay. Next up is Paul Roberts. Paul, you there?
I am. Thanks, Patrice, and thanks to the committee. This is a really impressive presentation. Paul Roberts, I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 8. I'm a Cross Street resident and very enthusiastic and excited to see this path built at long last. To my fellow residents who are maybe new to town or new to this project, I will tell you that this is one of the most studied, debated, intensely reviewed capital projects in the town's history. It has been going on for more than a decade. In its latest iteration, there have been two very well, staffed committees to both study feasibility of this and then to put forward a plan. They held, I'm guessing, in total. Scores of meetings, public hearings and meetings and reviews of the many issues around this 12-foot strip of asphalt along a set of train tracks. And the community has had ample time to weigh in on just about every aspect of this. I'm very happy to see the design put forward. And as you can tell, we have gone into very minute detail here about the plans for this. So the community has been consulted, and this is a project with very broad and enthusiastic support within the Belmont community, because it is going to be a transformative piece of infrastructure in this town to get cars off the road, to get bikers and walkers and joggers off of our busy streets and onto a beautiful path, to give access to public transportation and to two of our three business districts, eventually Waverly Square as well as Belmont Center. So I'm really enthusiastic about this path, and I would encourage you to do a few Google searches. There are many plans and documents and reports on the town's website that are available to you to go back and review the history of this project. But it is very well researched. The community has had extensive input, and the plans that you're seeing are, although at the 25%, phase, so early draft, but reflective of that input. On the police issue, the police have been very involved at every stage in the design, and in fact, the location and width of the path and so on were chosen in part because of police input on ability to access the path in the event of an emergency and so on. So their input on this has been solicited, and safety has been an issue. Both of the abutters and of path users has been an issue at every stage in the design. I know because I've been both attending these meetings and writing about it. So all these issues you have are great and valid issues, but they have certainly been at the forefront of the committee's mind as this plan has developed. So I would guess I would just try and put you at ease about that. The only other thing that I would say is I'm really excited about this path. I am also a little bit interested in how we're going to handle the Brighton Street intersection with this signaling. I am inclined to think that blocking bike access to Brighton Street when trains are going by for allowing people to cross straight across it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because it's just going to result in backups both on Brighton and on the path that we might otherwise avoid. So I might push back a little bit on that, so long as there's a gate across the tracks to prevent cyclists from taking a right or a left across the tracks, obviously when a train's coming. And to the person who suggested a 14-foot wide path or 16-foot wide path,
I'm really not quite sure I agree with that. I tend to think that a wider path is just going to encourage some people on bikes to go faster, as we see with wider versus narrower roads. So I'm not sure that that would actually make the path safer. And finally, I would just say on the crime issue, crimes happen in Belmont all the time. They happen along streets, and if you look at longitudinally at crime in Belmont, it actually tends to cluster more by Route 2 and the neighborhoods around Route 2 than by any of the cycling or pedestrian infrastructure. None of us say, well, I think we should roll up Route 2 and turn it back into grassland because of property crime. We just don't have those conversations because we assume that automobile infrastructure, of course, has to exist and is necessary. I would just say this is equally as important and necessary for the 21st century and for the development of this town as Route 2 was in the 1960s and 70s. So let's not have a conversation in which we just talk about bike paths as if they're just frills and accoutrements that we can get rid of and that they aren't valuable and important. They're just as valuable as our streets. They're just as valuable as our highways. And we don't say, well, because there was property crime, we're gonna pound the street back into mud. So that should not be the conversation here. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Up next is Michael.
Hi, guys. Sorry, my internet's been fading in and out. I just want to ask one really very simple, but hopefully can give a bit of an answer to question. It's about the economic value of this community path. I'm wondering what it will be like, how much potential revenue we could see from people biking around town, buying in the local shops, connecting to Belmont. Having people come in from other places and say, you know what, Belmont's a great town. I want to buy flowers at the flower shop. Or how many people will get out of their cars, do biking, and save some energy on their gas bill, and they'll put that into the town. So only the economic impact, tourism we might see from people coming into town to buy our goods and to help our businesses.
This is John. I can say that, we haven't done an economic analysis, but I can speak from many other trail projects I've worked on that, they do, tend to promote activity and pedestrian and bicycle access especially to downtown areas that have a draw, whether it's restaurants or shopping. So, but we haven't done an economic impact analysis for this project. I don't know that the town has.
No, the town has had a study done by the Belmont Business Study Group, and the path was identified as an economic viability project for the town, given the underpass and the connection to the Belmont Center. But nothing formal has been done in regards to economic viability with a path being in place. So next up is Jared.
Hi, two quick follow-up comments on one thing on the width of the path. Some of the earlier feasibility study drawings showed the 16-foot path marked appropriately with cyclists in one part and walkers in another part. I think that's one of the key things that to consider when looking at a wider path. From my experience on the Minuteman or even along the new nicely designed path in Cambridge along the Charles, when walkers are given stone path options, even right along the river, mostly they still tend to walk on the pavement. So I think properly marked, wider paved paths could actually be safer for both pedestrians and cyclists. And then which hosting an event next Thursday with Mass DOT, people from Mass DOT, and they have a new public engagement platform, and I think they'd be willing to talk about that at that meeting. So if we want to join to see what maybe as a possible way to engage further moving forward, I'd encourage people to show up at that meeting where you can they'll talk about ways to engage the public and the path forward from their perspective on the Belmont design. Thanks.
Hey, Jared, before you sign off, the first part of your description actually kind of buzzed out. I didn't really catch the first part of that.
Could you repeat the meeting you were mentioning?
Oh, the Friends of the Belmont Community Path is hosting a virtual event at 7 p.m. next Thursday.
Okay.
So it's on the Friends of the Belmont Community Path Facebook page as an event.
Okay.
So it's a virtual event on Zoom.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jared. Before we get to the Q&A comments, is there anyone else that wishes to ask a question? Just raise your hand. Okay.
What?
We have another question. So Isaiah?
Yeah, I just had, I'm a Channing Road abutter on the east end of Channing Road, and I'm really excited about the path. But I had a quick question about the privacy screen. I think my understanding of the privacy screen, which I didn't see on the initial design, but I did see on today's presentation, seems like it would prevent my access to the path. And if that's the case, this wonderful path is being built right behind my house, and I'm having privacy concerns, but I'm not actually getting access to the path itself. So can you talk a little bit about how, an abutter might get access to the path without, the only way to get onto the existing bike path is, on the existing roads and not on the new path?
So Sean, I don't know if you want to talk about the screening fence, but we're showing options. We're not really saying that there will definitely be a screening fence the entire length of the trail. So we definitely want to work with people. If you want to have an access, we don't want to put something up that you're going to want to cut down. So we'll definitely work with all of the abutters and look forward to any suggestions. Please feel free to put your address and, a suggestion that you would like to have a connection, and we'll make sure that we show that on the plan.
Yeah, and absolutely. And not really understanding, Isaiah, where you're at on Channing. I know several of those areas, the grade between the property owners relative to the path is a significant grade change. So I don't know if you're at the end that would be closer to a grade, and that would make those connections much easier. Particularly for you, if that's what you're interested in. But I think kind of understanding where you are and what those physical, topography issues are relative to your property in particular would be good to know.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm actually at 277. So there is a grade there, but even so, I feel comfortable scrambling up a little slope to get access to a nice walking path. But yeah, I really appreciate working with abutters directly, and I look forward to those further meetings.
Okay. Thank you, Isaiah. Again, is there anyone else that wishes to ask a question by raising their hand? Okay, with that, there's several of you that have listed a question or made a comment in the Q&A section. Does anybody want to verbalize what they had asked or commented on? Otherwise, I was going to read the questions, but not the comments. So Aaron has asked, is one of the two recreation entries supposed to be labeled with something else? John, I think that was towards the beginning of your presentation.
Yeah, I think what I saw in there, and Isabel may be able to clarify, but there was a recreation component associated with biking, and there was a recreation associated with pedestrians, and I just wasn't sure. I would agree, but yeah, I think Isabel could probably clarify that a little bit. It was on the bar chart.
Right. Yeah, so all the survey questions were like multiple choice questions. So we had like, and if you might help if we pull that slide up again. But yeah, so to answer your question quickly, this is exactly what the survey gears at. So we were wondering if you were using the path for recreation, then you could give the choice or check whether you would be using it for biking or for walking or for both. So essentially, that's what the question is about. Does it answer your question?
So Pam Andrews was commenting on having a Whirl Road tour. Some of them were confused about some of the spurs. I don't know if you wanted to try and answer that.
I mean, we can certainly, as we said, we will, we'll meet with people that we weren't able to meet with last fall. I don't know when that will happen though, but I'm not sure if you can ask a more specific question or post it in our website about confused about the spur. These are just parts of the plans. If you're talking about over by the Clark Street pedestrian bridge, then if you look at the full set of plans, you can see how that connects. Originally, we were calling that a spur, but I think that some of the comments we received since we developed those draft plans was that the connection to Clark Street will actually be the main path and not a separate spur. I don't know if that was exactly what you were questioning about, but that's
Okay. Next comment came in regards to being confused about the new accessible connector, whether or not it goes below the train tracks or at grade.
So the only place we're going under the tracks is at Alexander Ave, the underpass. That will be jacked underneath the tracks, and that would essentially connect Channing Road to the Belmont High and Middle Schools by going below the tracks. At no other areas are we crossing the tracks.
Great. Priscilla had a question about having video surveillance on the path and whether or not that has been discussed.
That would be something that if the town wanted to do, I bet that would probably have to come from the police department, I would imagine.
Yeah, Priscilla, I can mention this to the police chief and get some input from him on that. It's going to depend on a multitude of factors, whether or not video surveillance would be on the path. Priscilla also asks again, will the path be made of a substance that will facilitate the transfer of water for environmental concerns? I think this goes to her earlier question.
Well, yeah, we can look into permeable pavement.
Yep. John Ramos, the traffic circle would be better as a traffic oval.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a circle, but we tried to make it as big as we could without impacting the private property on either side. So I think that the circle kind of fit the best in the area that we were looking at. But I mean, I agree with you, it doesn't have to be a circle, but it just, in this particular area, it happened to fit well.
Okay, Priscilla asked, since the maps are in color, wouldn't it be better to use colors or cross-hatching to show whether the path is at grade level above or below?
We can add a color hatching. I mean, the only place that we're going below is the Alexander Ave underpass. So we can do that.
Alita had the next question, but I see Alita's hand is up. Alita, I didn't know if you wanted to ask, since your hand is up, I'm gonna allow you to talk, and you can ask about your, the spraying of the herbicides over by where you are.
Hello, Patrice. No, you can go ahead and deal with that since you already have it there. What I wanted to ask now is whether you're still planning to install benches along this multi-use path.
The question was about benches?
Yes. I mean, Patrice, you can answer Michaela's question, but I also would like to ask whether you're planning to install benches.
The kiosk question, I have to tell you, Ailita, I don't know the answer to. I'd have to look into that as to whether or not what Keolis is doing. I can't speak for them, but I will look into it and get back to you.
That would be appreciated because we're getting spray from very close up. Now, as to the benches, John, do you have an answer?
I mean, I think that there might be a desire to put benches in some locations. I remember during the site walk, you said specifically you don't want benches behind your property, and I would think that many people would feel that way. They don't want people congregating in their backyards. That's something that we'd like to work out as we look at trailheads and possibly gathering places closer to Belmont Center is what I'm envisioning. We know that the abutters near the Alexander Ave Underpass don't want people congregating there because, again, that's also next to or in back of their homes. So I wouldn't imagine anybody would want any benches over on the Alexander Ave, the Channing Road side there. So to answer your question, I don't think it makes sense to have benches in back of people's houses. We want to put the benches where we want people to gather and congregate. So, but we haven't
I think that makes a lot of sense when you just kind of look at the corridor that we have, at least within phase one. I would definitely agree on the sense of kind of at the town center, that area seems logical. It's a bit of a gathering space. We've talked about that being more park-like. And then the trailhead opportunities as well that start to be a little more open and a little more room as well. So, I mean, if we were to do it, I would say I would agree those seem to be the logical places to do that.
Okay, but you also mentioned installing bike racks. Where would that be?
I mean, to me, the bike racks would be in very similar places. I mean, it's a place where you want to leave your bike to go somewhere. So, I mean, I think the opportunities for us to put bike racks and potentially to support businesses in the town center would be a logical place to figure out where within the design. It doesn't make any sense to have those along the route per se behind or within the linear aspect, but certainly as things widen up and there's places for people to go or to take advantage of the nearby businesses or places to see or do or to get out would be real logical places to do that, but not so much on the linear corridor.
That'd be great. And that actually answers one of Priscilla's questions about crime, that as you mentioned, this will make it park-like, and parks are known to be, quote, crime generators, close quote, based on the research papers that I have read. And that is one reason I wouldn't want to have benches in back of my house. But anyways, to answer her other question is abutters are informed, at least we haven't been informed much of what's happening, which is one reason I've had to go to every meeting of this committee in order to stay informed. Thank you for all your answers. Good night.
Thanks, Lita. Many of the other comments that have been made on the Q&A had already been addressed. I didn't know if anybody else wanted to. Oh, hold on. Priscilla, did you have another question?
Yes, I posed it about the gas company. I don't know if people are aware, but there are a lot of gas leaks in the area, especially, for example, where the Star Market is, where there's gas leaks coming from where the train goes under the grade, near the bus, where the bus 73 and 554 are. It's so strong, it's unbelievable. And I know that the gas company was planning to work on that. Plus, people are paying for those. We have to pay for the gas leaks. We have to pay even though we're not using it. So I'm just wondering if, since you're talking about another train area, have you looked at working hand in hand with the gas company in terms of trying to figure out how to get rid of those gas leaks? If you're gonna, you're talking about boring. Remember B-O-R-I-N-G, boring?
Yep.
Yeah, I noticed that you're talking about the boring. So I don't know if there's gas pipes in that area. I just know over here there's gas pipes, and I've actually walked over to the bank and had not been able to breathe because the gas was so strong right by the car wash. I don't know if that's the same way where other tunnels are where the train goes through. I'm not sure. So has anyone looked into that at all? They actually have a map online of all the gas leaks.
We have not addressed that as part of the design project.
Because it would be nice if you guys could work together, especially when you're boring and then try to get rid of these gas leaks. They're just so noxious.
Yeah, the borings are really just to take soil samples for the purpose of designing retaining walls. I mean, we don't purposely go near any gas mains. They would actually make sure that any borings they do aren't near any underground utilities.
But you're going to be going under the track someplace, so there's nothing that's encountered there.
I don't remember seeing. We can look at the plans. I don't remember seeing.
I think it would be nice to look at the gas pipelines and find out what's going, and also look at the gas leak map that they have. I think they have it for all of Massachusetts, but Belmont has quite a few. And think about it: if I'm walking over to the bank and I'm over late at night, 2 or 3 in the morning or something, and I can smell the gas so strong that I can't breathe. That's just amazing. So there might be an outgassing at certain times.
Priscilla, I'm actually looking at that map right now, and I see no leaks anywhere along Channing Road or the Belmont High School area.
Okay, that's good. That's good to know.
Yep.
Thank
Hi,
you.
this is Dave Marcotte. Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm so for Dan Fitzgibbon, he's our trench course coordinator. I will have him look into that with National Grid. And this is the first that we're hearing that there are known leaks in that area. Are they like stage 2 or stage 3? Because stage 1, they need to be responded to immediately.
I think she's talking about an area over by
Sure. I'm not sure if what stage they are, but I know I've called the police and they've come out. The fire departments come out and measured the leaks. But if you think about it, if I'm trying to walk and, with my cane, trying to walk down that area and I can't breathe when I'm going through there, I mean, it must be pretty strong. And if they're taking tests at different times, it depends which way the wind is going. But there's definitely leaks. They might not be in the pass area, which is fine. So you people probably don't have to worry about that. But the leaks are unbelievable. There's another one, I think, further towards
stage 1 is an immediate response within 24 hours. If you're saying you cannot breathe, that to me would be.
Yeah, definitely. That happens at certain times. I don't go too often at that time of night, but sometimes I don't feel well. And, I do walk around about 2 or 3 in the morning and I can, the smell is unbelievable. And I used to go to teach early in the morning. I'd be driving to Boston Public Schools and I'd be going out at about, I think I'd be there at 7 o'clock in the morning. So I'd be going through the square over here, Waverly, and I could barely breathe when I had my car windows open.
All right. So I will look into this first thing in the morning. The fact that you're telling me that you can barely breathe is pretty severe. So I will describe that to National Grid and we will follow up.
Yeah, there's no exaggeration in that. Absolutely none.
I'm not. I am not doubting it.
Yeah, I'm telling you, it's just scary.
Thank you, Jay. We have another question from Alita. Alita. Not letting me unmute. Alita, I'm trying to unmute you, and for some reason it's not. You're either denying the request or. We have another question from Darren.
Yeah, I guess there's much confusion. She was trying to lower her hand, and I guess, yes, there's no question. So.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else have a question? I think, Russ, I don't know if you want to wrap things up.
Thank you. John and Isabel and Sean and the whole team at Niche for the presentation tonight. Really appreciate it again. Hope you got some good feedback from the questions and comments that were raised. It was certainly interesting for me to listen to as well. So thanks again. With that, I won't hesitate to ask if there is a motion from my fellow committee members to adjourn the meeting of the CPPC tonight.
So moved.
Yep.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, meeting is adjourned. Thank you everyone again for coming. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Movement has peaked. So where does this leave the meaning of Haile Selassie in the future? Once again, there are differing views.
Lots of Rastafari people come from the lower economic echelons in society. We find it quite difficult to buy our own churches and our own buildings like people from different communities. And also the fact that our faith is 80-something years old. It hasn't
spread the message, grow the movement, because it has its peaks and troughs. Because I would say in the early years when I was younger, the faith was so strong. You had messengers moving around all over, talking through the faith, trying to kind of engage people and talk through who His Majesty was, what he represents. So we were on our own missionary, and I think we continue to be missionaries.
It's been a few years since we spoke to Anthony